Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind the recently released graphic novel Nothing Special, Volume 1, Through the Elderwoods. It's Katie Cook. Thanks for coming on, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me.
How's the day starting for you?
It is basically one of the first days that I've had the house back to myself in months.
Oh.
There's always people milling about. Especially my husband was on a family medical leave to help take care of me because I broke a bunch of toes in my foot.
Oh, boy.
I've been in a wheelchair since November.
What happened?
There was an underlying condition that we didn't know about that was like a vitamin deficiency that was causing me to get kind of shaky and weak. And then I fell down and I broke some toes. And then I was like, that hurt. I'm going to hobble down the rest of the stairs that I didn't fall down, get in my car and go to emergency. And then it hurt so bad, I fell in the driveway and broke toes in the other foot.
Oh my God.
And the whole thing resulted in some nerve damage as well. So I have PT twice a week to get me walking again. But yeah, I've been in a wheelchair and my husband's like been around the house all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes he works from home, but other than that, he's just been here. Like, thank goodness for Pal World, because otherwise he'd be all up in my business all day asking how I am. Like, that game saved us.
Thank you, Pal World.
So yeah, but it means that I am a dedicated audience for my editors finishing a bunch of books.
No kidding. Wow. Your story is a lot more understandable. I broke a toe last year, too. I did it when I was trying to get to a box that was underneath a bunch of wall tile, like really big, heavy sheets of it. And instead of asking my wife for help because she was playing a video game and I didn't want to interfere with her, I decided to lift it myself. The problem was I could lift it, but I didn't realize that apparently whoever had been using it before, this contractor, cut the bottom out of it. And so I lifted it up and all of the tile landed on my big toe.
Aww.
And my toe like exploded like I was a cartoon character. I tried walking it off. It turns out that you cannot walk off a very, very broken toe.
You can't. And then at first they're like, maybe we'll just give her 2 boots, like those big clunky plastic boots.
Yeah.
And that didn't work at all. And then finally, after I was in the hospital for 25 days.
Whoa.
Doing work calls while I was there with my hospital stuff in the background. They were like, oh, your body doesn't like you. And after this huge like storm, like perfect storm of whatnot, they were like, your body needs more of this and it's not processing right. We got to do this. And you done fucked up your legs. So we're going to transfer you over to neurology because this is no longer a broken toe issue. This is from the knees down, your legs don't work.
Well, I'm glad that you have your space to yourself again,
Yeah.
But I'm also glad that you're on the road to recovery.
Yeah.
I do have to ask, like you said, 25 days in the hospital while you're on calls. Then you are in a wheelchair. You're kind of limited in your movement. It sounds like you were still engaging with your editors. What does that do to work for you? Like, are you just doing what you can? Were you working full time? What did you do?
In the hospital itself, it was just like, well, thank God I kind of have a lull in some of the stuff we're doing right now, because it's all off with a different team and then it goes to this team and then it comes back to me. But there were a couple of call requests where I was like, no, I'm not in front of my computer. I cannot do that. Well, when are you going to be back in front of it? Well, but it was around the holidays, so everybody was like kind of turned off. So I didn't have a lot to do. It was when I came back, because I had Thanksgiving in a hospital. And let me tell you how bonkers sad that is to have, like, it was my husband, my mom, and my 2 kids, like, around a meal that they had catered, like, by the grocery store, and there's no tables. They were using like the little meeting room where they have like group activities for the Thanksgiving for, the actual patients. And I was like, no, I know for a fact that all of that food was made by the people on the floor above us. And I don't trust any of them. those people have single room suites, so they usually don't cook. I don't know what's going on.
Did your Kickstarter for the art of Nothing Special, did it end?
It was during part of that.
Yeah. Talk about adding a stressful time to stressful time. I mean, everyone I talk to who does a Kickstarter.
Well, I wasn't in charge of it.
Oh, okay.
You know, we put another company in charge of doing everything. So I didn't have to do anything but post. And they were sitting here going, all right, we need 3 posts a day. We need this. We need this. We want it on all your social media. We want it over here. And it was like, okay. Because me, it's whatever I can do from my phone or my iPad. Like, that's it. And it's, you know, they're like, well, what about, why don't you work on some custom graphics or some radishes saying this? And it was like, I mean, I have Procreate on my iPad. I'm not like a genius with it.
Yeah.
So it's not going to look like my work. But oh boy, there was just that like, finally, I was like, I am in the hospital. I've been here forever. We are in like me, like up against a window going, when will my husband return from war? Like Victorian garb at this point of when can I leave? But it was the icing on the cake, really, of 2023.
It's interesting because I don't know. I always talk to people about like going up to a book launch and then going up to like doing a Kickstarter and everything like that. And they're like highly stressful things. They're like, I want to find something to distract myself so I can still like be a person. I think you might have taken that to an extreme.
I did. I turned it up to 11, actually. But like I said, it's and the book stuff, once it's, you know, kind of out of my hands, because that's all 10 speed, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. They're putting out the books. So it wasn't my job to put all the files into InDesign. It wasn't my job to go proofread everything, you know, and so that part, I was really removed from that part of the process.
Fortunately, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing all about it in little bits and pieces from her going like, what, you didn't make an Instagram post this morning. I was like, I was getting a CAT scan. What do you want from me?
Hopefully no one thought you came up with the most elaborate excuse for not doing the specific things you wanted them to do, or they wanted you to do.
I posted one picture and everyone thought I was dying. Like I had lost like over 20 pounds and, you know, I just looked tired. You know, I had IVs hooked up to me for a while. So my arms are all bruised. I'm all bruised from the falls, not from the neck up. Thankfully, I didn't like break my jaw or anything, but I finally was like, guys, I'm okay. So this stuff has been going on. I'm going through some neurological issues. You know, the break in the toes isn't even an issue, but it is being resolved. And after months of PT, I will be up and walking again. I did Seattle Emerald City Comic Con the other week in a wheelchair. And I don't live there. I had to fly on a plane.
How was it?
It was fun. But again, everybody thought I was dying because they're like, oh, you're in a wheelchair. What happened? I was like, I have nerve damage in my feet and a vitamin B deficiency that apparently like caused me to like almost pass out all the time. It's like, it's getting resolved. I'm even getting robot legs and then I can get out of the wheelchair. They cast my legs for them. But yeah, they're just like, there's something there. Katie's not saying something. Like, I have a screen cap of it for a while between like taking a break from the comic, taking a break from social media during, you know, 2023. And then this, like me suddenly appearing going, I'm not dead. You know, everyone was like, oh, she is dying. And there's an actual Google search that came up because I was trying to like set a Google search for if Nothing Special reviews came up. But one of the things is Katie Cook dead?
Oh my God.
And I was like, enough people looked that up?
Yeah. It's always weird when you have the Google Instant stuff show up where it's like you type in, it's like Katie Cook equals dying or something like that. You're just like, really? Like there's enough people searching that this is one of the most dominant things? Oh, wow. Well, you seem like you're doing very well for a person who is dead. So I'm happy for you. But let's talk about some of the comic stuff. I actually, for first-time guests, I like to get into some background stuff before we dig into the bulk of it, which is Nothing Special. I actually want to set the stage for how that book came together in full by talking about your comic story. Where did your comic story begin? Were there any specific comics that first attracted you to the medium or anything?
Well, I learned to read on newspaper comics. Ever since I was little, my parents would get us all up and then they'd go get ready for work. If young enough, they made us a piece of toast and we were to doctor it as we pleased. And as we were older, they would just shove us in the kitchen. So as I was eating peanut butter toast, I would open the Detroit Free Press, which at that point had 3 pages of black and white comics.
Oh, wow.
And I would open it up and read all of them. And I would save my favorites for last, which was, Calvin and Hobbes. At that point, I think Luann, which I was very heavily into as a 12-year-old, Garfield, all this stuff. And that was it. It was like, this is what I want to do. And if my parents were taking a long time, I'd take out one of their yellow legal pads and I would doodle, Snoopy and then eventually I started making my own little comics, like as a little baby Katie, while I was reading the newspaper, completely lifting from their jokes, by the way. That is sad to say that, first grade Katie ripped off a Charles Schultz gag, 100%. Never to be published.
You were a kid. It's to be. I mean, I used to do the same thing myself. But I talked to Faith Erin Hicks for an interview about the comics that made her, like the 5 comics that were like really inspirational to her, and we talked about newspaper comics. And I actually think that in a weird way, because I think sometimes people disengage comic books from newspaper comics in a strange way, like they're like a completely different species. I think that newspaper comics are really underrated in how, like strip comics, and how they have impacted like the generations of comic fans and comic creators. Because like I wouldn't be the comic fan I am today without Calvin and Hobbes and like Bloom County and The Far Side and stuff like that. Those were huge for me.
They're so important, and they're like a first introduction to reading and whatnot for so many kids. And there's a connection, and it's like I can read these 3 to 4 panels which are amazingly concise and constructed, and it's start to finish within this tiny, tiny little space instead of a 22-page story, instead of a 100+ page trade. And there's a pride to that as a reader. And I think it's also influenced a lot of people's storytelling and whatnot, because it's like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, done. And it's what I grew up on, because what was bought for me later on was just Archie. That was the comic for girls. And I mean, I grew up where the flagship Borders store was, and we didn't have a graphic novel section. The comic section was still a spinner rack, or like one little dedicated part of the magazine rack of like 3 books and up and down on the 3 layers. And for me, they're like, and you're a girl, so here's a Jughead digest. Oh, you're a girl, here's a floppy of Betty and Veronica. But I bought them. Well, my mom bought them because she loved Archie. And I mean, I had boxes and boxes of Archie comics, the digests and the floppies, because I loved it. But I also had Calvin and Hobbes trades as they were coming out, Foxtrot trades, Garfield, later on Zits and all that stuff. And I would read them and I would reread them and I would reread them again. And I still do sometimes go back to the old stuff. I mean, I read Calvin and Hobbes, like the big I see them back there, the big hardbacks. I have those.
Yeah.
I'll pull those out once a year and just be like, this weekend is the reread of, trying to connect to why I love this medium so much. And Bill Watterson is a constant reminder of how amazing comics in general can be. Because I passed on all of my original paperbacks of all of the trades. I had every single one to my kids. And I said, this is like the passing of the ancient scrolls to the next generation. Please be aware that this one is missing part of its cover, because that's where Bentley, who was the puppy when I was a kid, chewed on the cover. And I can tell you what every single stain, every single mark is on those books. And my kids read them. Like I have a 13 and a 10-year-old. And at one point I was like, do you want me to put those back on my shelves in my office? She said, hopefully, because they still mean so much to her. And it was like, No, I pull them out all the time. And then my 10-year-old is like, oh, I take them into the bathroom with me. And I was like, oh, I didn't need to know that. But cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason why Calvin and Hobbes can't work for multiple generations.
Yeah.
It is kind
No,
of, there's a
not at all.
timelessness to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that you were drawing. You started drawing. You started like lifting stuff from Charles Schulz. You were figuring things out for yourself as an artist. You eventually went to the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, where you got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Illustration back in 2004. Did you go there knowing that you wanted to make comics, or were you just wanting to make art at that point?
No, I wanted to be a cartoonist. Aforementioned baby Katie, there is a photo in my mom's house of, like the kindergarten photos where you're holding up the I want to be an astronaut sign. Mine says, I want to be a cartoonist. And even back then, I had these gigantic, chunky glasses because my eyes were terrible and a bad haircut. And I was wearing a t shirt with a cartoon Scotty dog on it, not licensed, like just a cartoon dog. Smile as big as can be. Like, I want to be a cartoonist. It is the only plan I've ever had. So I went in like, I want to be a cartoonist. And the first thing they do in art school is like, cool, you got to learn everything else too. And I was like, damn it. So I'd had foundation drawing, I had perspective classes and things like that, especially in the illustration department where you have to take a couple years of perspective along with painting and, other drawing classes. So, baby Katie learned that it's not just drawing cute, adorable things all the time, it's learning how the shapes work. So even if, what I'm doing is when I simplify it, it still makes sense in that space and just all this other stuff, because a good cartoonist to me is also a draftsman. I think a really great example of that is looking at any of Walt Kelly's original strips, with the blue line under them, where his characters are so carefully drawn, so are like the trees, and then you see the lines that he put in across everything to hand letter. And the same thing with Bill Watterson. He was a draftsman. Even Charles Schulz, he created a world where the buildings were just that line and just this, but he had the characters interact with that voice of the adult up here that we can't see, or the just one line that's representing a door, so well with how the characters reacted and what the dialogue was, that we don't care if that's just a line right there. We know it's a door. We know it's the side of a building.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not only a draftsman of art, but a draftsman of characters, or, world building and things like that when you get into larger scale projects.
It seems like the art school experience really helped you understand the totality of what being a cartoonist might be.
Yeah, and it's not something that we really defined back in art school, except for me, because I was a pretentious little jerk sometimes, because I was like, I am going to be a cartoonist. And they're like, cool, we're going to go smoke pot around the fountain outside the DIA. You want to come? And it's like, we're in art school. Like, come on. It's like, oh, all right. I guess I'll go cut my hair short and put a blue streak in it.
One of the interesting things about your story is you came out of art school at a very interesting time for comics, because 2004 was like literally right before Scholastic Graphics came to be. It was right before First Second came to be. And so it was before kind of the formalized book market of comics really started to actually exist in a real way. And before librarians had totally bought in, before all these booksellers had bought in. And so you were kind of, baby Katie was jumping into a baby version of the modern comic market in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Because that's also the time where newspaper strips were dying.
Yeah, yeah.
They were being cut left and right from newspapers everywhere because newspapers were dying. And the first thing to go is the art department, and then the music department. But, so I came out of school like, I don't know, going to live in my parents' basement and try and submit stuff to, what was it, United Syndicate, or, and it was like, big headlines. Hello, we have cut 20 strips from the Detroit Free Press. Here's this. It was like, huh. But that was also kind of the burgeoning of the webcomic.
Right.
And the really early days of it. And that's what, we all kind of bounced to, all of a sudden they had websites that was like bookmark your favorite web comics and then just come here and you can link to them and, have all your updates. It was a big deal, like to go online and read your favorites every day or every week if they were posting weekly, and like keeping a list of the ones that you liked. And it was like the little baby version of it. And I started a web comic out of college not too long after everything, that was called Gronk. And that was my 4 panel strip that I did for me. And that was my web comic for a while I had a job. And I did not live in my parents' basement.
That was one of the funny things about that webcomic era. And it's not that it's so different now, but like for example, I'm a big fan of John Allison. Like I think John Allison's like Scary Go Round and like Bad Machinery and all that stuff. I love his work. But it's interesting when you look at it, and so much of it is built on the same rhythms of newspaper strips, where it's like that's kind of where the people who, I don't want to say this is an oversimplification, but the people who wanted to do newspaper strips found a home in webcomics, because like you could do comics in the similar rhythms. You could do it and you can kind of control your own fate. That was also back when it was maybe a little easier to monetize webcomics. Now it's, if you did it on your own website, it's a little tricky. But was that the main appeal of doing your own webcomic, was you weren't being able to work with the syndicates, you weren't able to do newspaper strips, so this gave you space to kind of like figure out your own voice and try to do your own thing with Gronk?
A little bit, yeah. Funny story. I started drawing little doodles of Gronk and like this cast of characters before I even did the webcomic. I would post them to my live journal.
Nice.
But it was all based on the fact that I had an assignment during college that was a self-portrait. It was like, do anything you want, bring it in. We want to see like how you see yourself and do a self-portrait. And so everybody brings in, their work. And of course, it's art school. Everybody's angsty. It's just a lot of big acrylic paintings with like blacked out eyes or dripping mascara or a blood across your naked chest. Because art students are fun. I brought in the drawings of what I would look like as a monster. So I made this little short, squat, green monster with my pixie cut. And then I did this little booklet that was like the 25 facts about Gronk.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all like, it was me. It was like, because I remember one of them, that was my favorite one, was Gronk is still not used to this. And it was Gronk sitting at the little wooden like horse bench that you sit in during live drawing sessions and stuff, with a little naked monster doing this pose. Because the only people posing naked at a downtown Detroit art school are homeless people. It is not a good scene. But, and then I would start doodling this character, and I basically learned more about Photoshop by creating these doodles, because then I started coloring them. Then I started doing this really just all on my own time. Well, I was at the back end of college, and then into my job. I got a job as a graphic designer at a scrapbooking company.
Nice.
Right out of college. I designed scrapbooking supplies and paper supplies. But I would keep doing my own work, like when I left, it was like, I don't need to work on whatever license I had to do today, or it's a boy banners.
Right.
Or my infamous conversation. We did a product line for Walmart, and I designed all of these cute little baby animals on Noah's Ark that was going to go on invitations and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there as the lead designer, and then my art director and this other call with the Walmart buyer, and they're like, can you make the orange on the tiger look more Christian? And to this day, it comes up once a week when I'm like doing a color choice or whatnot on a piece. And I'm like, is that Christian enough? One Walmart buyer's not going to want it. But no, at the same time, like to vent my frustrations, I would draw like Gronk having to take phone calls at work and being frustrated and having the old school twisty cord there. I have one of David Peterson did one of Gronk with the cord around their neck, shouting at it. Because he's my friend, he had to. And that actually led to, as I was doing Gronk, work doing Fraggle Rock, and I was doing then sketch cards for tops and whatnot because I was also posting like Star Wars fan art because I love Star Wars. And, that led to little freelance gigs, all of this stuff I was doing. And then one day I was like, I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to take a chance. I can do more if I leave. I can try and take on more of this stuff and make a money. So I did. I left. I found out I was pregnant 3 days later, and I just quit my stable job. That was great. But it was very freeing, and I left, and I've been working for myself ever since. And I think that was, God, 14, 15 years ago. How old is my oldest kid? My oldest kid is 13 and a half. I don't know. So something, math.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Looking for the right place to read digital comics? You can find it at Omnibus. Omnibus is a modern digital comic book store and reader app carrying your favorite single issues, volumes, and omnibuses all day and date. It's just like a comic shop where you pay per book, but digital. Omnibus has even upped its game lately, as they've added a web reader in store on top of its iPad version, with iPhone and Android coming soon. Looking for an ideal digital comic store, but with an excellent shopping and reading experience, one that uses novel discovery features to help fans find their next new favorite book, and one that features many of the best comics and publishers in comics today, including publishers like Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and more? You can find all that on Omnibus. Visit the web store or download the app today at omnibus.app. And now, back to the show. So you did all that, and then I kind of feel like even though you ultimately only wrote 18 issues of it, at least based on my count, I'm admittedly terrible at counting. I don't know why it's like my weakest skill. But I think the project that first really made me fully aware of you was your work as a writer on My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. And that's how it was a big hit and a consistent one at that. But it sounds like Gronk was kind of where the ball started rolling for you.
Yeah.
But do you feel like My Little Pony in some ways... How do you feel like that experience changed your career, if at all? Because my lasting vision of you is like going to Emerald City Comic Con and like seeing a line, like a giant line, and I'm just like, well, that's Katie Cook. And it was always during like the peak of the powers of My Little Pony. Like, did it really change things for you?
Yeah. The convention lines are usually for the little tiny watercolors
Oh, okay.
that I do. Signatures and stuff, I wave them up because I don't want anybody at a big show waiting like 45 minutes for a signature. That's ridiculous.
Sure.
And I'm also a chatterbox, so my paintings take a while.
Sure.
And if my husband is not there, like kicking the chair to be like, shut up. But, My Little Pony kind of came from Gronk. Bobby Curnow, the editor at IDW at the time, liked Gronk. He thought it was really funny. And at first he wanted me to do backup gags for Godzilla. He was like, I don't think they're ever going to go for like funny Godzilla, but let's try. So can you do a sample comic? Because I think these would be really funny. So I did a really cute Godzilla fighting Mothra. And Mothra wins, and so with a little band-aid on his head, Godzilla is like stomping across down the city like, oh, shucks. And then he sees a butterfly house, so he stomps on it. And that's the gag. That he feels better about himself. And of course, that was an absolute no-go. The property in charge of Godzilla was like, absolutely not. It's like, do not ever send anything like this again. And we were all like, oops. And then, Bobby's like, well, I like Gronk so much. And what about, we just got this property, My Little Pony. It's not really going to go anywhere. We want to put out like 4 issues of it so we can just put it into a trade and just have a kid's comic out there. Like, that's what it was pitched as, of like, this is 4 issues and done. Put it like as an overarching story so we can trade it, get it in bookstores so kids that like My Little Pony have something to pick up. And I went, okay, I have never written anything longer than a 4 panel strip ever. So of course I said yes. Cause I was like, all right, cool. They didn't want me to draw it. They wanted me to write it. And, because I'm not, I am like the licensing person, but I also draw in a very distinct way that wasn't on model, for My Little Pony. And I was walking past my friend Andy Price, who I've known forever, at a C2E2, and he was doing a commission of a pony.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what you doing there, Andy? And it was Fluttershy talking to birds under a tree, and Applejack was there, and one of the birds was crapping on Applejack's hat, and Applejack just looked miserable. And I was like, "Do you like ponies, Andy?" And he's like, "It's not bad." There's a Benny Hill gag in one of them that I thought was really funny. And I was like, would you like a job? And that's how My Little Pony was born.
Amazing.
Between a woman who got the job, through like random coincidence, and her friend who is so old he used to draw the Quantum Leap comic.
Oh my God. I do think it's funny that 4-issue series ended up turning into. I looked at the Wikipedia page in the build up to this, and I think the regular series ran for like 102 issues. And then there was like just a laundry list of other things associated with it.
Yeah.
Like, here's these miniseries, here's this special, here's this. And I'm just like, oh my God, like this was.
Yeah, I wrote for over 5 years. God, it was a while. I wrote My Little Pony on and off, and then I also did some stuff for Marvel. I did stuff for Disney. I was hopping around, basically being the writer or the gag artist on so much stuff. And I stopped doing Gronk. I didn't have time for it. So my work took away from my personal project. And I was okay with that because I was making money. I was going to a lot of conventions. I was invited as a guest to all of these conventions, because of My Little Pony, because of Star Wars, because of, all of this other stuff. Because then later I started illustrating Star Wars children's books as well. And, there's this huge career shift of like my thing to everyone else's thing. And then all of a sudden, Webtoon comes out of the works with Tom Akel, who I'd talked to several times before. And then he basically said, "What if we paid you to make whatever you want?"
That sounds pretty good.
And I was like, oh, because like I said, I'd become the licensing person at this point. People reached out to me when they wanted a children's book show kind of thing in comics form, and they didn't want me to draw it. I really think that I'd become kind of stagnant in some of my artwork because I wasn't drawing as much. I was the writer. I was just the writer on things, which was just a bizarre thing to realize. So I took Webtoon up on their offer because this is just when they were first trying to break into the US market. Webtoon wasn't really a thing yet.
Right.
Over here, but it's huge, in Korea and whatnot. And so is that waterfall scroll format of comics, which I wasn't particularly familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down and I wrote the first arc of Nothing Special over a period of time. And I went back to it and I made edits and I cut things and, just made it that concise story of here's this pocket in time that we're going to learn about these characters together. And there's a beginning and there's an ending and it's, the 3-act play and it is the long form of a 4-panel comic. But yeah, and then I really stopped doing a lot of my licensing stuff to go back to doing a webcomic. That I even I paid for it out of pocket. I paid for, a colorist to come in and do the brunt of the work so I could put out 40 to 60 panels a week, and I'd go in and do all of the touch-ups and the details because they were working off my style guides and stuff like that for colors. And then I brought in my friend Nate, who lettered the whole thing and kind of helped me position it to use that scrolling format, as a storytelling device, especially later when I really got into it and I was making panels that were like 60 inches tall.
Yeah, I did want to ask about that. I read that you had, like kind of when you're going through like the conversion process, it was like that was one of the challenging things is like you would have these panels that were 60 inches tall in the digital format. Is that just for detail reasons? Like, you just wanted it that big so you could be able to get into it that much?
Detail and the storytelling. When you're reading a comic on a page, like an actual book, you have that page turn moment. You don't have that online unless you create a way to do it. So some of those taller panels, it starts with that moment of like, hey, what's that? And then that huge panel leads into it's the scenery, of the situation they're getting into or things like that. I mean, one example of that is in you'll see it in book two, they open the door on this huge estate, and it's the introduction of people bustling around setting up for this party. And to tell that, I did it from basically a bird's eye view sitting atop the chandelier in the Great Hall. So you see the tops of everybody's heads. You see fairies flitting around, hanging garlands. You see the spiral staircases from above. You see, the big family crest on the floor, way pushed down to the bottom via color hold. And then, at the very end of that is the kind of gasp, because it's like, this is where we are. This is the character's reaction to seeing this huge thing that you just took in with them. And now you're also like, yeah, oh my God, with the characters. So it gives you a moment to either create tension or do some world building and, pull that reader back into that space. So they're not losing interest by just going white space, white space, white space, which so many do. And I think it's a time saver for some people. But, for me, I looked into using that space as a storytelling device.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so let me set the stage a little bit. This is Nothing Special. Nothing Special started as a webtoon back in October of 2017. It's now a graphic novel, Nothing Special, Volume 1 through the Elderwoods at 10-speed graphic. I'll do a quick spiel on it. This book follows the life of teenager Callie, whose dad collects magical items and owns a magical antique shop. Callie has long considered herself, and I quote, nothing special, having lived in the human world her whole life. That is until her 17th birthday, where she finds her home broken into, her dad missing, and a blood trail leading into the magical realm. With her friend Declan and a friendly ghost Radish spirit, Callie sets off to find her dad and discover the secrets the magical realm holds. It's a super charming book. I really enjoyed the print version. I went back and I looked at some of the webtoon stuff. It's interesting to think about the difference in how, when you're doing the vertical scroll, like how you have to tell that story. And like when you were doing, when you started this was before, I think, a lot of the stuff that American fans know, like Lore Olympus wasn't coming out yet. You didn't see like Rachel Smythe wasn't out there. But it is interesting to think about like that white space and kind of how you tell a story like that. Because like, for example, with like Lore Olympus, the way that Rachel uses it,
it's all black and then lots of gradients and textures.
But it's also like controlling like speed of read, pacing, all the stuff like that. And it's interesting because I think sometimes people don't really think about the artfulness and the control you can do with the vertical scroll. How difficult was it to get used to the rhythms and the pacing and all the different things that you would do in that versus like a strip comic or like writing for a print comic?
Yeah, it's bonkers. You can really tell in the early part of the book that I was a little stagnant.
Sure.
It is. It's very panel, 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 because I was thinking of the translation to the book. Like even in my thumbnails, I was like, well, we could get these 5 on here. We could do this. And again, I'd been the writer for everything. I still was making artwork. I would draw some of my stuff. I was doing big watercolor pieces for the Disney Wonderground Gallery. So I was still drawing, but I wasn't drawing a big comic.
Right.
So this was a really daunting project because my first contract was for 27 chapters. And if it did well, they would renew it, And then if it did poorly, I was out the door, like that kind of thing. It was like, you are not worth the investment. Please go. Yeah, it's like I said, you can really tell in the early stages that one, I wasn't drawing where I normally was, because it's also the first thing I did completely digitally. So it was like, I have a Cintiq that is collecting dust. I'm afraid of it. I'm going to go over there and use it because of speeding up the process of getting the inks to Alan's team, getting everything to Nate. If it's all digital, we can meet deadlines. It's not going to happen if I have to scan in everything, then get it to the colorist who is going to hate me forever because it's not like line art in Photoshop. So it's really rough for a while. And I think it's also you can almost see like the evolution of where I was drawing more. Like there's a turning point. And that's also where I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? What if this never sees a book?
Right.
So that's when I start having way more fun with it. And then it's vastly different into book two. So after drawing all of this, they're like, people love it. We're going to give you another season, is what they call it. And then said it could be open ended. It didn't have to be 27 chapters. I could make it as long as I wanted. So I was like, oh man, I'm going to tell a bigger story. Let's see if I can do that. And I love the second book, not only because I was dedicated to drawing this thing, like basically 24/7. I was having fun with it. There was a return to a fondness for what I was doing. I was connecting with these characters. People were connecting with these characters. I had a lot of readers, I had a lot of fans that would interact through social media or in the comment section. And it was that return to, I love making my stuff because I don't need to worry about making my dead sentient radish say this because this is my project. And I didn't really have an editor. I talked to like some of the wee babies that do stuff for Webtoon that are all like, in their early 20s, and some of them are really good at what they do. And they're like, oh yeah, my editor and I go back and forth on the story, all the time of where's it going? And then you should change this. And I'm just like, you guys have editors? I don't have anybody to talk to. I live in my basement. I talk to my cat. And I work in such a way, like some people do webcomics and it's like this meandering thing of like, ooh, maybe I'll take the story over here now. And it's not concise and things don't get wrapped up and drives me nuts. I write the entire script for my story arcs out ahead of time. And they are in gigantic. The first one is in a 1-inch binder after I print it out. And then I read it again and I read it again. And then I go with my little red pen and my post-it notes and I pick where the chapter breaks are going to be. And then I thumbnail things. Like I have stacks of books that are the thumbnails for everything that are all hand done. They're all, regular notebooks. And then it's like, okay, so this panel is going to do this, but what if we make it this big and we have it do this? So I can start to visualize everything. I can tell myself, it's like, you don't need this panel and then arguing, but I put it in because it would be so fun to draw. And like, but we don't need it. It's like doing that self edit and then really playing with what I was doing. And then I know where I'm going with that story the whole time because that ending is written. The script is written. And a lot of what Radish says is what I'm thinking at the moment, like building up the story. And like I said, in book two, now that I was given permission to explore more, there's so many more characters and all this dialogue, that just builds up who these kids are, what their world is. So you can start to get lost in it.
I really liked that you included in the back matter the pictures of the script and in the sketchbooks of thumbnails and everything. I did think it was interesting. So you did thumbnails in print, but then you put them in, then you did the actual final art digitally. So were you like scanning your thumbnails or did you just redraw them?
No, my thumbnails are stick people.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
They are not
I saw that.
like
Yeah.
fully realized things. They're just little doodles. And that was mostly because I would just sit, like after I finished, one set of chapters, I'd sit down and kind of reassess and be like, did I introduce anything or make a gag that I gotta like round out or finish? There are background gags that are bookended in another background.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Because it's like while I'm drawing to keep myself entertained, I add all that stuff in the back. And it's if you put it Chekhov's gun, if you put it there, even if it's just a thing in the background, you gotta address it later. It's good. If you're gonna do it, you gotta go all in. You can't just leave people hanging. Like, is that tree spirit still following Declan? Like years later? Yes, he is. And I'm very big on that. And so it's just like I said, it's just this concise story, but playing with this new format. I mean, it turned into a blast, especially in the newer stuff, like the back end of season 2 and then all of season 3. Oh my God. It's like borders are made with giant trails of demonic goo, and things are bizarre and weird and long, and Nate's gonna kill me. Nate formats it now for Random House. He already my name is Mud, but this is weird story. So Nate Pride, who is the letterer and formats everything and is like the design person for Random House now for all the books. One is the only person besides me that has touched every comic. And he was in my basement. We had an art night group that kind of disbanded during COVID, but it's there's a getting the band back together type of thing. But it's myself, David Peterson of Mouse Guard, Jeremy Bastian of Curse Pirate Girl, Jay Fosgett, who does, like me, too many licensed things to name, and then his own project Bodhi Troll, and our friend Nate, who is an amazing artist in his own right. I mean, it's just phenomenal ink work and stuff like that. But he's also does lettering. So I hired him off the bat to just do letters. And I'm sitting there talking about this format and how I'm not used to it and how I got to figure out how to push myself, sitting in my studio in my basement with all of these guys. And Nate is like, it's going to be hell to put in a print one day. And I kept saying, that's future Katie's problem.
Right.
That's future Katie's problem. I made that joke all the time. And it turns out it was future Nate's problem.
Yeah.
Poor Nate.
So there's two things about that. First off, that was one of my big questions when I first knew this was happening, was because I always am fascinated by the process of translating like a Webtoon vertical scroll into a print book. But also it's just like, when you think about it, it's like 29 chapters doesn't, like, that's how long the first season is. It doesn't seem that long. But then you get the book and you're like, oh my God, this thing is a flippin' beast.
It's over 400 pages.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but it feels like I could do some damage with this thing. This is like a not inconsiderable book. And so
it's a chunky boy.
It's very chunky. And like Nate getting that, good job by Nate, because it reads well and he figured out a good solution for it. Sounds like his job is only going to become more complicated with future books though.
Oh God, yeah. And season 2 had to be split into 2 books that size.
Oh wow.
And it looks like season 3 might be 3 books that size. So it is a gird your bookshelves moment. Because not only are they thick, it is, because they're like just over an inch each, especially the hardcovers turn it into something bonkers. The soft covers are nothing to laugh at, but that hardcover is big. And then I was just envisioning the fact that, there's potentially 6 of those books done right now. Well, not done, but just that would go to print before the last story arc, which could potentially be another 3. And just looking at that and saying, oh my God, it doesn't look like that much work on my end because it's done. Once I'm done with it, I'm like, it's done.
Yeah.
I don't need to worry about it anymore. It's not my problem. And then seeing it going, oh no, I did a lot. And then knowing that over the past, few years, I've done enough work to fill those books is bonkers.
Yeah.
Like, I know Kickstarters for one 20-page comic that haven't fulfilled it in like 5 years. And here I am. This is what I did in that time frame, and I got a book deal, and the first one stopped.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is the new home for creator-owned crowdfunding. Visit zoop.gg to support campaigns by Harley Quinn's Chad Hardin, 2000 AD's Jimmy Broxson, Comics Prodigy Near Levy, and The Phil's Chris Weston, amongst other live campaigns. There are more titles coming soon, so visit the site, sign up for alerts, and support these creators by putting out amazing books. To take part in all the fun, it takes less than 30 seconds to create an account. The e-commerce style checkout is easy and intuitive. You can add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. And of course, every creator appreciates your support. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. I will say, in relation to it though, I mean, it's like Webtoon, you're gonna have like the white space and everything like that. I
Hmm.
like how neat oriented everything. Like it reads really nicely.
Yeah.
Like he did a really good job with that. But I did want to ask about the story itself because one thing I like about this is Gronk was you telling a story about a fantastical being living in a real
Hmm.
world. Well, to some degree, Nothing Special is about a couple of relatively ordinary people in an adventure in a fantastical world. So it's kind of like an inversion
Yeah.
of Gronk in a lot of ways. Except for this time, instead of Gronk, I think you are effectively the radish. What
Yes.
made this the right story for Webtoon, and then like I mean, just for you to tell? Period.
Thinking back to baby Katie only having access to Archie, especially as a preteen and an early teen, and then eventually across the street from the flagship Borders in Ann Arbor was a little store above an apothecary called WYSIWYG, which was all Japanese imports and English translations of manga,
Nice.
which we had basically never seen.
Yeah.
We had Sailor Moon in the Cartoon Network block of like after school and Dragon Ball. That's it. We were like, ooh, new cartoons. And then eventually this new thing called Pokemon that was on in the mornings before I had to go to the bus. But I was a little too old for it. And oh my God, seeing how much manga was aimed towards my demographic, you would just see myself and all of these other teenage girls sitting around WYSIWYG reading to the point where they were like, guys, you can't just read the books, you got to buy the books. And it was like, no. It's like, you're a nerd who works at an anime store, what are you going to do about it? It's like, just enjoy that there are teenage girls sitting around. And especially it was right across from that Border store because when I was a kid, if my parents were going off to do something in town, they would just drop us off at Borders and like kick us out of the car and say like, we'll be back in an hour and a half. So we'd just go wander around Borders and listen to the headphones with new albums and wander or read a book. I was a really voracious reader thanks to basically growing up in the library in the school that my mom worked in. And then it was like, ooh, we're going to go across the street to WYSIWYG. Anybody coming? And it is. It's that thing of like, oh my God, they do make stuff for us. And that's what I wanted to make. I wanted to make a story for that kid who was told the only thing we have for you is Jughead Digest. It's like that meme of going into that Pawn Star shop, and I was like, I would like a comic aimed towards me, and he's like, best I can do is Jughead. So I wrote something that I wanted, 13-year-old me to have.
That's great.
So that's where it came from. I wanted something that was fantastical. I wanted something with a touch of romance. I wanted something with some adventure, but I wanted it to be cute and weird and funny.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we live in the renaissance of cute and weird and funny and graphic novels everywhere for every age group. Raina Telgemeier, like, I think has built a house on the top of the New York Times bestseller list at this point. Like, she forwards her mail there. That's where she lives. And that's where we are. Kids love to learn to read on graphic novels and comics. Dav Pilkey with Dogman and Captain Underwear. Oh my God. Like, you can't go anywhere in my kid's school without seeing, a kid with a comic from the library or their own, like jabbed in their backpack, like sticking out. It's not zipped up. And I'm the parent, like shoving it down into the bag, going, don't lose your book.
Yeah.
Because I love seeing a kid's comic that is so cherished that the cover is falling off. That, like, there was a My Little Pony moment where this little girl, like, very shyly handed Andy Price and I a comic book. She handed over this threadbare, disgusting My Little Pony comic. Like, it's fallen apart. It's got tape on it everywhere. And it's like, you want to sign this one? Awesome. Okay. And like, we both sign it. And the dad leans over and he goes to Andy. She sleeps with it.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
And I have a lot of stories like that of kids learning to read on my books or finding something, in my books that they relate to. Especially with Nothing Special. I have a lot of young readers who are like, oh my God, I love everybody. It's like I want to be their friend. I want to go on adventures with them. I want this. I see cosplayers that are like running around, like one a little girl like had made a radish dress and her friend was dressed as Callie and they're running around with him like screaming about vegetables and like jumping up onto her back, and it was like I made that.
Yeah.
It's like it's bonkers.
That's one of the interesting things about doing a comic for Webtoon is like, you go on there and like, even for me, I can see that there was like over 30 million reads of Nothing Special with like 416,000 subscribed readers. But the other thing too is like all those people aren't necessarily just reading it and going away. They're in the comments. They're in the comments section and they're directly engaging with you and everything like that. Did you find that, I don't want to say it's like all of a sudden you were rewriting your story because you work full script or anything, but did engaging with the community on Webtoon change the experience for you as a creator at all?
It basically gave me hope that this is what I was meant to be doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're working on licensed stuff, it can feel like a job. I tell everybody that, I'm a comic book artist, I'm a cartoonist, I'm a writer for a living. Even the worst day of my job is the best day of my job because I'm doing what I love for a living. And even the rough days, were, okay. But then seeing all of these people interacting with me and tweeting me and talking about the excitement for the next chapter on Instagram when I would post things I was drawing, that level of interaction of like engagement from so many people of, oh my God, I can't wait to see what happens next. Oh my God, this is amazing. Gives you that motivation to draw the next chapter and make it even better. So it's like I'm not trying to do shortcuts. I'm not trying to just get a page out there. I have a list of what I call the comic faux pas that I see of like copying and pasting a panel. If it's not meant to be funny, don't do it. Redraw the thing, move it to a different angle, figure it out, or white space, or just adding a blurred to indicate falling. No, draw them falling. It's, I don't want to disappoint those people by, now doing something that was subpar just to get it done. I'm an artisanal webcomic.
That's good.
Like a fine balsamic vinegar.
Well, I mean, I do think one of the interesting things is you were doing Gronk, where it's like people are there for you. This is very much reflection of you. And then you were doing licensed stuff. So when you're doing like a Star Wars Clone Wars webcomic, or if you're doing like My Little Pony, or if you're doing Fraggle Rock, they're there for you. But for the most part, they're there for the licensed property.
Yeah.
And so when you do something like this, when you're doing Nothing Special, it's interesting because like they're there for you. And you're the star, not like, I don't know, Rex from Clone Wars or something like that.
Yeah, and it's so different to have somebody come up to you and, it's like, hey, can you sign this Star Wars book for me? And you know that they're there because they love Star Wars. And yes, I am an introduction to me through Star Wars or through My Little Pony or through any of these other licenses that I've done. And to all of a sudden have your name associated with your own thing by some people, because there were comments, when I would do like a Q&A thing, I would say like, well, I also have done these Star Wars kids books. And they're like, oh my God, you're that Katie Cook. Or someone's like, oh my God, you're the same Katie Cook that does the My Little Pony comics. Their introduction to me is through me. And that is amazing. And now it's this mix of like at Emerald City last week, I was signing people's My Little Pony books, people's Star Wars stuff, because I'm not going to lie, I've kind of been out of the woodwork for a while. I hadn't been back to Emerald City since pre-COVID because big crowds, I'm like,
Yeah.
No, thank you. Katie, no likey. And, going back there and having people that usually save up stuff for me to sign, going like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in like 3 some years. And it's like, yep. So now there's a new pile of Star Wars stuff. There's all this other stuff. But then they had an early release of Nothing Special over at the Penguin Random House booth that weekend because it was coming out the following Tuesday. So they had copies. And then seeing over the weekend, I think it's they sold 150 some copies at the show,
Oh, wow.
and I signed all of those, and almost all of them went to people that read the book already. Because I posted, you can get a copy in advance here, and I'm here, and I will sketch in it and stuff like that. But yeah, there was like that. Oh my God, these people are here for me, and they're talking to me. They're asking about the books. They're asking when it's going to continue online. They're talking about, if they want a radish painting, not Yoda, not this, not that. They want a radish, and they are very specific. It's like, I want a grumpy radish. I want a happy radish. Or can you do Callie and radish? And it's like, yeah. It's like, these are my characters. I don't need to look up reference for that. I know every single detail. Yeah, it's like they're my fictional children. I have watched them grow up through my own eyes as the stories go. So seeing other people that are like, no, those are also my fictional children. Like, I am so invested in these guys. It's like, oh, so do we like start a mom's group or something? Like, what do we do here? I don't even go to the PTO stuff for my school for my kids. So being in charge of these kids is going to be weird.
Obviously, it's a completely different species, but I did love when I was doing my research that you, in your Wikipedia entry, not Wikipedia, Wikipedia, the photo they use of you is one of your wedding photos where you're holding a bouquet and a red lightsaber. So
Yes.
I'm not saying it's like a similar child, but it did seem very clear that you were probably working on the Star Wars stuff was pretty cool for you too.
Oh God, yeah. In the nerd department, I am like the black sheep of my family, because I grew up with a mother who had a dedicated Star Trek Christmas tree.
Oh no.
And my brother can recite every single line from every single episode of Next Generation. He wore a Next Gen costume to school when it was not Halloween.
Wow.
And then I'm like, I like Star Wars. And it was like, get out of this house.
Rival gangs.
I liked how junky Star Wars was. I liked that it was like, it's not like a dirty movie. No, it's like everything is dirty in the background. It looks like
Yeah.
crap. And I was drawn into those characters and their interactions being sometimes serious, sometimes fun. Everything was a fantastical, amazing world. And it wasn't always a philosophy lesson, Lorne. So, and I'm drawn to the more fantastical. And again, it's not dissing Star Trek. I love Star Trek, but where Star Trek is a nice, like laid out, pretty plate of like, at a high end restaurant of like, this is what you're getting. You're getting a filet mignon with this nerd accoutrement over here. And this is where it is. High fantasy and space fantasy and all that stuff is a charcuterie board. It's everywhere. And you can pick and choose what you like from it. And you're like, ooh, I don't like salami, but I love prosciutto, so I'm going to go over here. It really drew me in, and when I started getting more and more into other comics, when other stuff was coming out that wasn't DC, that wasn't Marvel, and just kind of picking and choosing from it, I have a huge manga collection down in my office, and it's all like fantastical world stuff. It's, there's only a few other like little, like there's Death Note, which is a psychological kind of thriller, but I still think it's a fantastical thing because of that book, because of that demon. I like that hint of magic in things, especially with Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman is one of my favorites. And a lot of what I do is inspired by his idea that there's another world through the cracks of the world.
My wife is a big fan of anime, and she does not like very serious and like violent live action movies. But the interesting thing is like she loves, like she watches like violent anime, not exclusively. She watches a lot of different types of anime, but she says that she likes fantasy violence. She doesn't like violence. And I thought that was an interesting distinction. It's like she doesn't mind watching Demon Slayer, but if that was live action, it wouldn't feel the same. And I totally get that. It's like if you kind of have that fantasy sheen over it, or like that sort of fantastical sheen, it makes it a little easier to digest.
Yeah, it's I mean, I like anime a whole lot, especially now. I watch a lot of it because my 13-year-old is super into it, which only makes me cool when they're like trying to grab all the Demon Slayer books out of my office, like that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a different approach to storytelling. And I like both, but I was going to bring up John Wick, but I also think in a way John Wick, which I love, is a fantastical world.
It's not
It's
how real people fight. Like, it's not, this isn't the real world. We don't use gold coins.
John Wick is an anime with Keanu Reeves in it.
I don't disagree with that. God, what? There was
Yeah.
something recently. I asked my wife about something of whether or not it was anime, and it was definitely not anime, but it felt anime enough where it was just
Hmm.
like, it's not. I don't know. It's interesting how there can be live action things where you're like, that's basically anime. It's like the same concept.
And then it's turns around. I love the live action One Piece show that Netflix did. I know that One Piece is like the best selling like manga comic book thing ever. There's 5 bajillion issues of it. There's 5 million episodes of the anime. I am terrified to dive into that world, but I watched the Netflix show, and with that wide angle lens that they use, it looks like the panels of the comic every single time. And I love stuff like that. I love watching a movie and being like, comic book panel, comic book panel, comic book panel.
Yeah.
And I am married to a film major who runs a lot of the multimedia labs on North Campus at the University of Michigan. So he teaches film editing and Final Cut Pro and all this stuff, as well as, running all of the creative spaces. So when we watch a movie, there's either like we're in sync watching the movie, or he's watching it from like that really educated perspective, and I'm sitting here going, ugh, eh, eh.
Yeah.
I swear to God, you're gonna make me watch True Romance again.
Oh my
Eh.
God. Just a couple more questions. I want to ask about something pretty big because I mentioned when you graduated from school, things were changing. And things have
Mhm.
just continued to change. Like when you first published Gronk, you did it on its own website, but then 7 years later, Nothing Special was published on Webtoon. And
Mhm.
that seems to be clearly the right move. And it was also just because, like, that's being on platforms is kind of the thing. But
Mhm.
also, I mentioned before you did a Kickstarter. You did a Kickstarter for Nothing Special, like an art book. You also used Patreon to support the work of Nothing Special when it was publishing on Webtoon. As your career has evolved, the way that you've engaged with the varying platforms and how you're doing that has evolved. How do you think what it takes to succeed in comics has changed since you first started working on them? Like, does it feel like a completely different world than when you first got started?
It is different. I got some of my first comics jobs by taking a portfolio of my work to a convention and showing it to editors like the old school way. And then I also got, work doing some Star Wars stuff before the Disney buyout when we were in a desert of Star Wars. It was like nothing new is happening. They liked a little watercolor piece I did of Yoda sitting in his house and he's knitting with little lightsabers.
Oh my God.
And there's a little sign in the background that says "Home Sweet It Is." And that one little piece on my Deviant art got me a job doing gag strips for StarWars.com's blog, which is no longer a thing. And then working on the Clone Wars webcomic, which was a webcomic that tied into the end of the Clone Wars episode that had just aired. So there was a thing of like you can go on and read like 6 to 8 pages of what happens next, or something that tied into kind of a background thing going on. But yeah, it's so I got some work this way, some work this way. And I think it's almost all online now because everybody can showcase their work. And, I think in comics, I know one of the things that an editor looks at of your work is not, hey, this guy can draw a badass pinup, because that'll get you a cover. You need to show that you can tell a story over a series of pages. And I know that was always the test thing for Marvel. They would give you a script and you'd have to show how you'd handle that. But now everybody can look online and say, this person knows how to tell a story, or this person knows how to do this. And it's so funny to me. I actually ended up having to cancel. I was going to go to Mocha over the weekend. And then my publisher, who saw me at Emerald City in the wheelchair, was like, you're going to die if you go to Manhattan. And we need you to finish these books. Because I was going to be on a panel that was kind of about talking about my process of wanting to do print, ending up doing a web comic to transition that idea, going back to print through licensed work, and then going back to web comics to escape, kind of print again. And now it's going back into print. And just this evolution of of everything. My 13-year-old, as much as they love all the comics in my basement, and they read a lot of normal books. That is what we call them in my house. If a book doesn't have a picture, it's a book. Like if you ask them anything about Percy Jackson or any of the many, many tie-in books, get ready. Oh boy. But yeah, it's that evolution of this to that, to this to that, showing that they are interconnected. They are, something that is almost this weirdly organic, symbiotic thing of, they exist together, because even a lot of the web people kickstart for print versions of the book. I just did that on a larger scale. I sold the series. Thankfully, I have a amazing book agent, Seth Fishman, who really had been kind of poking at me for a while, and was amazing because I was kind of stuck in this. No, this is where I am. This is where I make money. I'll just write pony comics because I already had a really strong sense of what was all ages versus what was a kid's comic and what ages and stuff are. But I gave him a PDF that I had made because my old book agent had this same PDF and sat on it for like a couple years and never sent it out. And I didn't renew my contract with them. And I went over to Seth and I gave him the same PDF that was called "Please Make My Thing Your Thing." That was the title of it. And then it went into Nothing Special and like everything I'd done so far. And a few weeks later, he was like, "There's going to be a bidding war."
Wow.
So we had several people that were interested in it. And 10 Speed, really not only came in with a great offer for the books, but they're a boutique imprint. And this was going to be their first fiction comic that they printed. But they also do like normal books, like big, elaborate cookbooks. I think they did like one of Michelle Obama's books, things like that. They put out beautiful books. So it was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have like this beautiful comic, because when they were like, this is getting to be 400 pages, it wasn't like, let's split it. It's like, let's make it balls to the wall. Amazing. Let's just do it. And then I actually found out later that the person who founded 10 Speed before it was purchased by Random House was a friend of the family from my dad's family that was out in California.
Wow.
Some of the first books he put out were my relative Mark Miller, who's a professional chef, his cookbooks and stuff like that. So there's this weird like relationship, and his mom used to go down and like help with their accounting down the street.
Oh my God, it's destiny.
Mm-hmm. Because I just remembered Mark as the guy we told the story about, because he was, again, a very well-respected professional chef and restaurateur. And doing Thanksgiving, he flew in his own turkey and he bought it a seat in first class with him. And that's all I remember of that part of the family.
That's amazing.
That story. That's the California group. We're the Detroit group. And then there's the Ontario group. So.
Well, you have Nothing Special book 2 or volume 2 coming out in October. And then you have 4 more after that. So you kind of you got some big chunks coming out over the next few years. Continuing on the idea of it's a time of change, what has you excited about where things are headed, both for yourself and overall?
I think one, it's getting a chance to share this stuff with a bigger audience. Yes, the internet is the biggest audience you can get. But having a kid be able to go into a library and grab your book is also important, that kind of thing. It's important to me anyway. Like having the book that sits on the shelf is like staring at your Academy Award. I have of the huge wall of bookshelves in my office, that are all my books. I have one section that's just the books I've made. And I like looking at it because it's like, that's the last 15 years of my life.
Yeah.
Like besides my kids and my family and all of the ups and downs that I've had, it's like, but I made those, and those are going to last beyond me, which is great. I do have a joke in the first one that multiple award loser Katie Cook is the title page.
I think I saw that. That's really good.
Because I've lost many awards.
Hey, at least you're nominated.
Yep. Someone made me a little sticker last time I was presenting at the Ringo Awards. And it was like multiple award loser.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I hope you still have that.
I do. So, because I have a cork board of like my favorite things that people have given me at shows. And it's full of fan art of Nothing Special, full of fan art of Gronk. A letter from a little girl about My Little Pony that was like, I don't like it when you forget Applejack's hat, like scorning my name. And I was like, I'm the writer. I didn't do that.
Oh
I'm
my
still going to
God.
keep it. Comics kids have made for me, things like that. But yeah, like I said, it's mine. And that's my name on the cover. And no one can take that amount of work and effort away from me. And I'm also, especially with book 2, I went in on almost every page and added something new, like as it's coming out. Mostly because I'm confined to a chair during the day and I can't do my usual, I'm going to go get sushi for lunch and not be back for 2 hours since I have all of this room. So yeah, it's like I can either watch TV, and I've already watched all the TV in the world. Like I already watched all 5 seasons of Fargo. I got nothing left. So I've just sat here, and as I'm looking at pages, it's like, I'm going to add in this. I'm going to add in this. So instead of just using the white space that's now in the book that I usually would have used for more storytelling or a pause, book 1 is a lot of just the little plant spirits put in that. They're there in the white space of this book, but I went full Sergio Aragonés with some of this stuff. I would go in and redo some of the hand lettering to make it actually interact with the panel. I go in and I do little doodles of, I think there's one, they're at a kind of a tavern, and just in one panel, I had a little itty bitty little space. So I drew in a mouse hole on the original panel. And then in the white space, I have 2 very elegant cockroaches. Like one is in pearls and the other one is wearing a monocle and a top hat. And they're like, last Friday's vintage garbage is wonderful, darling. And it's much more that kind of gag, like just peppered everywhere. You can see a lot of it on my Instagram. I would post like little snippets. But I just had a blast. I would just throw on a podcast or an audiobook and just go to town. We actually just turned in the artwork for book 2. Like it's done on my end. The cover is done. I've turned in all of the pages with all of my crazy stuff on it. We've gone through everything in batches over the past several weeks with the editor, like fixing things, making changes, making Nate make changes, adding backup content that is just so funny. And yeah, it's a very different book than book 1. It's the same universe, but again, it's that turned up to 11, and then a tiny Stonehenge will appear on the stage. But yeah, I'm super proud of it, and I already can't wait to dive into book 3 to do more of the same, because there's so many fun reveals and weird things happening that are going to be in that 3rd book, because there's a big gala and they're trying to put Kelly in a dress at one point and it is not going well and shit's going down in book 3. But I'm really excited to just kind of jump back into it. And the fact that I woke up this morning and I didn't have pages to turn in. I didn't have like a call to jump in on, for any of it. And I was like, oh no, now what? I got to wait until they're done on their end. And then we got to jump into book 3 like immediately. And while I'm sitting here going like, oh yeah, let's do this, poor Nate is probably like, can I walk my dog and eat something first? It's like, I haven't seen my family in a long time.
Well, I'm excited to see what you cook up with the upcoming books. But Katie, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Nothing Special, your career, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to go work on my farm on Stardew Valley since I don't have anything to do right now.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Katie Cook. You can find her on our website, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as her work in Nothing Special Volume 1, Through the Elderwoods. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this week's episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site, Sketched, at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, JKJ Art, Faith Aaron Hicks, Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollies, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Alan Ellsworth, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polgees, Travis Schmeiser, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Holt, Nir Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Hoyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submed Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Carino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Holt, Philip Myrick, Chris Pachal, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Odd Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.